A story of love, deceptions, and surprising truths. Julia always believed her life would be simple and predictable. At 23, after graduating in business administration from a private college achievement, made possible only through sacrifice, she landed her first job at one of the city's largest tech companies, Techno Solutions. The position was only an administrative assistant role, but to her it represented the fulfillment of a dream. The daughter of a doorman and a house cleaner, Julia grew up watching her parents work tirelessly to provide her with a good education. She knew she would need to work just as hard to grow professionally and build a better life for herself and her family. That Monday in March, when Julia first stepped into Techno Solutions' sleek, modern building, her eyes sparkled with admiration. The lobby was impressive marble floors, glass walls, and modern decor she had only ever seen in magazines. It was a completely different world from her small apartment in the suburbs. She was greeted by Mrs. Sandra, the human resources manager, an elegant middle-aged woman who walked her through the company's floors, explaining how each department worked. The office buzzed with energy-young professionals working on state-of-the-art computers, conference rooms with cutting-edge equipment, and even a break area that looked more like a trendy coffee shop. "You'll be working in the finance department," Sandra explained. "Your role will be to support the team organizing documents, assisting with vendors, and helping prepare monthly reports. It requires attention to detail and responsibility." Julia's heart raced. It was exactly the kind of challenge she was looking for. She had always been organized and meticulous, traits she inherited from her mother, who managed to keep their home spotless despite working all day. When she arrived at her desk, a modern workstation with a brand new computer and phone, Julia could hardly contain her excitement. This was her first real job at a serious company with a signed contract and full benefits. She discreetly called her mother to share the news. "My daughter, I'm so proud of you," said Mrs. Maria, her voice trembling. "You did it. All our effort was worth it." By the end of her first week, Julia was already settling into the company's routine. Her co-workers were friendly, the work was challenging yet interesting, and she felt more confident each day. But everything changed during Friday's lunch break. She was in the elevator, returning from a cafeteria, when a young man rushed in, clearly running late. He wore jeans, sneakers, and a simple dress, sure nothing unusual compared to other employees, but there was something about his smile that caught her attention immediately. "Hey, you're new here, right?" he asked warmly. "I'm Pedro, an intern in the development department." "Julia, administrative assistant in finance," she replied, feeling her cheeks flush slightly. Pedro had expressive brown eyes, slightly messy hair, and a laid-back demeanor that contrasted with the company's more formal atmosphere. In the few minutes they spent together in the elevator, their conversation flowed naturally from the company to what was like working there, and even about the city. "It's great to have another young person around," Pedro said as the elevator reached his floor. "I hope we bump into each other again." The rest of the day, Julia couldn't stop thinking about that chance encounter. There was something about Pedro that intrigued her, perhaps his simplicity, or the fact that, unlike other men she had met, he seemed genuinely interested in conversation, with no hidden agenda. In the weeks that followed, Julia and Pedro started running into each other more often, always casually in the elevator, at the cafeteria, in the parking lot. Pedro was easy to talk to, genuinely interested in her opinions on different topics, and impressively knowledgeable about the company and the tech market. "For an intern, you know a lot about the business," Julia commented once over coffee. Pedro laughed, running his hand through his hair. "I've always been fascinated by technology. I study the market, the trends, you know how it is." Julia admired his dedication. It was rare to find an intern so committed and knowledgeable. As days passed, their conversations grew more personal. Pedro shared that he had studied software engineering and dreamed to start his own tech company one day. Julia opened up about her humble background, her parents' sacrifices to pay for her education, and her desire to grow professionally. "You're incredible," Pedro said one afternoon after hearing how she managed to graduate by working during the day and studying at night. "I have so much respect for people who fight for their dreams without giving up." 2 months after their first meeting, Julia could no longer deny it. She was falling in love with Pedro. He had become the highlight of her days. She eagerly looked forward to their conversations, and her heart would race whenever she saw him in the company's halls. Pedro seemed to feel the same. His glances lingered longer. His smiles were warmer, and he always found an excuse to stop by the finance department. Their co-workers had already begun making discreet comments about the friendship between them. On a rainy Friday, Pedro finally gathered the courage. "Julia, would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow night?" he asked nervously. "Nothing fancy. I know a great pizza place near downtown." Julia's heart leaped with joy. "I'd love to," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. She spent hours getting ready for the date. She chose her nicest dress, simple yet elegant, bought on sale styled her hair, and applied her makeup carefully. She wanted to look perfect, though not overdressed for a pizzeria. Pedro arrived on time, driving a modest car and dressed casually but neatly. The pizza place he picked was cozy, with a family-friendly vibe and affordable prices, exactly the kind of place where Julia felt comfortable. Over dinner, they talked about everything family, dreams, future plans, movies, books, and places they hoped to visit. Pedro was a perfect gentleman, pulling out her chair, attentive but not overbearing, and insisting on paying the bill. "This has been the most special night I've had in a long time," Julia said as Pedro dropped her off at home. "For me too," he replied, gently holding her hands. "Can I kiss you?" It was a tender kiss, full of sweetness and promise. In that moment, Julia felt certain she had found someone truly special. Pedro and Julia became inseparable over the next few months. After 3 months of dating, Julia finally introduced him to her parents. Mrs. Maria prepared a special dinner, and Mr. Jose was impressed with the young man's manners and humility. "He's a good man," Jose told his daughter after Pedro left. "Polite, respectful, hard-working. The kind of man who can make you happy." Pedro also introduced Julia to his family, though in a more discreet way. They had lunch at his grandmother's home, an elegant lady living in a middle-class neighborhood. Pedro explained that his parents had passed away when he was young, and that his grandmother had raised him. "My grandmother is very special to me," Pedro said. "She taught me everything about values and character." Mrs. Francisco welcomed Julia warmly, but Julia couldn't help noticing certain details in the house, valuable objects, a household maid, a level of formality. When she asked Pedro about it, he explained that his grandmother had been a teacher all her life and was simply good with money. As their relationship deepened, Julia began noticing strange things about Pedro. Though he claimed to be an intern, his knowledge about the company seemed far beyond what one would expect for someone in his position. "How do you know so much about the company's international contracts?" Julia asked once, after he mentioned a negotiation in impressive detail. "Oh, I chat a lot with the international team," he replied quickly. "You know how curious I am about the business." Still, Pedro always seemed to have money to spend, despite supposedly living on an intern stipend. When Julia brought it up, he explained that his grandmother helped him financially. There was also the way everyone at the company seemed to know him and treat him with a level of respect unusual for a simple intern. From executives to cleaning staff, Pedro was greeted warmly wherever he went. "Pedro is very dear to everyone here," Sandra from HR once told Julia. "He's a very special person." Something about her tone made Julia curious, but she chose to dismiss it. After all, Pedro really was special. 6 months into her job, Julia received surprising news. She was being promoted to assistant to financial board, with a significant raise and new responsibilities. "It's a fast promotion," Sandra admitted, "but your performance has been exceptional, and the board wants to invest in your potential." Julia was thrilled. She called Pedro immediately to share her joy. "I knew you'd make it," he said, genuinely happy. "You deserve everything good that's coming your way. Let's celebrate tonight," she suggested. Pedro hesitated. "Actually, I can't tonight. I have an important meeting." "How about tomorrow?" It was the first time Pedro had ever refused one of Julia's invitations. She couldn't help wondering what kind of important meeting does an intern have at night. In her new role, Julia gained access to more privileged company information. In one board meeting she attended to take notes, she heard for the first time the full name of the company's owner, Pedro Enrique Almeida Santos. How funny, she thought. That's the same name as my boyfriend. When she teased Pedro about the coincidence, he laughed nervously. It's a common name. There must be 10 Pedro Henriquez in this company alone. But Julia's suspicions kept growing. Later, while organizing confidential documents, she came across an old annual report that included a photo of a young man introduced as the founder's son, future successor of the company. The resemblance to Pedro was undeniable, though the photo was a few years old. It must just be a coincidence, she whispered to herself, though unease began to stir in her heart. Her doubts solidified one day during a casual chat with Carla, a longtime employee. Did you know the owner of the company is really young? Carla said while sipping her coffee. Pedro Santos is only 28 and already runs everything. People say he's very reserved, prefers to work discreetly without showing off. Julia froze. Pedro Santos? Yes, Pedro Enrique Santos. The founder's son took over 2 years ago, when his father retired. They say he walks around the company talking to employees, knows everyone by name, a very different kind of boss. Julia's world spun. Everything suddenly made sense: his deep knowledge of the company, the unusual respect he received, his access to money, his mysterious meetings. Her boyfriend was an intern. He was the owner of the company. That night, Julia could barely sleep. She felt betrayed, deceived, humiliated. Why had Pedro lied? Was this all just a cruel game of a wealthy young man amusing himself with a naive employee? The next morning, she confronted him, determined to get the truth. "We need to talk," she said, more serious than he had ever seen her. They met in the company cafeteria, which was empty at that hour. Julia wasted no time. "Why did you lie to me? Why did you pretend to be an intern when you're actually the owner of the company?" Pedro paled. For a moment, he said nothing, clearly struggling for words. At last, he let out a deep sigh. "How did you find out? That doesn't matter. What matters is that you deceived me all these months. I opened my heart to you, introduced you to my parents, and it was all built on a lie." Tears streamed down Julia's face. The pain of betrayal cut deeper than she imagined. Pedro reached out to touch her cheek, but she pulled away. "Julia, please, let me explain. Yes, I lied about my role in the company, but I never lied about how I feel about you. How can I believe you after this?" Pedro inhaled sharply and began to explain. "When I took over the company 2 years ago, I was completely lost. I was young, inexperienced, and everyone only saw me as the founder's son. Nobody respected me for who I was, just for the position I held. And what does that have to do with me? Everything. When I met you, it was the first time someone cared about me as a person, not for my money or title. You liked the simple Pedro, the guy who talked about dreams and plans, not the CEO." Julia shook her head, still hurt. "You had no right to make that choice for me. You should have been honest from the start." "You're right," Pedro admitted. "I was afraid that if you knew the truth, you'd see me differently. Every other woman I met only became interested once they found out who I was. You were the first who liked me for me." Julia sat in silence for a long time, processing his words. Part of her understood Pedro's dilemma, but another part felt deeply betrayed. "You don't trust me," she finally said. "If you did, you would have been honest. Instead, you build our relationship on a lie. Julia, I love you. I love your simplicity, your determination, your character. You make me want to be a better man. Please, give me a chance to prove my feelings are real. And how can I know this isn't just some rich boss fling with a poor girl? It feels like a soap opera." Her words cut Pedro deeply. "If you truly knew me, you know I would never play with someone's feelings. But I don't really know you, do I? Everything I thought I knew was based on lies." Julia stood up and ended the conversation. "I need time. I need to think. Julia, please." "No, Pedro. You lied for months. How can I trust you now? How do I know your feelings are genuine and not just guilt?" She walked out, leaving Pedro brokenhearted. For 2 weeks, they avoided each other at work. He respected her request for space, though his pain was evident. Co-workers noticed a change in them, but no one dared ask questions. Julia poured her heart out to her mother. "I understand your pain," Maria said gently. "Being deceived hurts. But let me ask you this besides that one lie about his job. Was Pedro ever false to you? Did he treat you badly, disrespect you, or look down on our family?" Julia thought about it. The truth was, Pedro had always been respectful, kind, and attentive. He never treated her as inferior, never showed arrogance. On the contrary, he valued her opinions and dreams. "No," Julia admitted. "He was always perfect with me." Then maybe ask yourself, did he lie out of malice or out of fear? 2 more weeks passed in silence. Julia and Pedro barely looked at each other at work. It was painful, but it gave Julia time to think about everything she had lived with him. One morning, she found an envelope on her desk. It was a handwritten letter from Pedro. In it, he confessed his fears, his mistakes, and most importantly, his love for her. He admitted he had been wrong, but explained that he lied only out of insecurity, terrified of losing her if she knew the truth too soon. He wrote that every smile, every conversation, every kiss had been real, and he promised that she gave him another chance, he would never hide anything from her again. Julia read the letter several times. She could feel the sincerity in every word. That weekend, she spoke with her best friend, Patricia, who knew the whole story. "Ju, you need to ask yourself one thing," Patricia said. "What matters more, your wounded pride or the love you two share? He lied, yes, but it wasn't a hurt, it was to protect something fragile that meant a lot to him." Julia hesitated. "But how do I know he won't lie again?" "You don't," Patricia replied simply. "You never know with anyone. Love is always a risk. The question is this love worth the risk?" On Monday, Julia decided it was time. She went to Pedro's real office on the top floor, a place she had never dared enter. His secretary announced her, and Pedro immediately asked for her to come in. His office was elegant but not ostentatious, with a wide view of the city and family photos on the shelves. He stood up quickly, nervous but hopeful. "Julia," he said, "thank you for coming. I read your letter," she began firmly, "and I have some things to say." Pedro nodded, bracing himself. "First, what you did was wrong. You broke my trust. I know, and let me finish," she interrupted. "Second, I understand why you did it. I don't agree, but I understand. And third, despite everything, I still love you." Pedro's eyes lit up with hope. "But," she continued, "if we're going to try again, I need guarantees. Absolute honesty from now on. No lies, no omissions, no protecting me with half-truths. And I don't want special treatment at work. I want to grow on my own merit, not because I'm dating the boss." "Done," Pedro said without hesitation. "Anything you ask." They hugged, sealing not just a reconciliation, but the start of a new chapter built on honesty. The following months weren't easy. They had to rebuild trust, deal with gossip in the office, and prove to themselves and to others that their love was real. Julia worked harder than ever, determined to show that she deserved her promotion and future achievements on her own. Pedro, on the other hand, learned to lead with more humility and closeness to his employees, much of it thanks to Julia's influence. A year after the truth had come out, Pedro prepared a surprise. He asked Julia out for dinner at the same pizzeria where they had their very first date. The place looked simple as always, but this time it was decorated with photos of their shared memories, trips, family moments, smiles. When dessert arrived, Pedro knelt down in front of her. "Julia, you taught me that love isn't about money or status. It's about two people who challenge each other, support each other, and grow together. You made me a better man. Will you marry me?" With tears streaming down her face, Julia answered without hesitation. Yes. Their wedding was simple yet elegant, just like them. Family, close friends, and many of the company's employees who had become part of their extended family celebrated with them. Julia's parents beamed with pride, while Pedro's grandmother embraced Julia as if she had been her granddaughter all along. Married life brought its own challenges. Julia had to balance being the wife of the company's CEO with maintaining her own professional identity. At first, some colleagues whispered that her promotions were only because of her relationship, but Julia proved them wrong through her hard work, dedication, and genuine talent. Pedro, meanwhile, learned to separate his role as a husband from his role as a leader. At home, he was just Pedro, a man who cooked breakfast with Julia on Sundays, who loved walking hand in hand to the park, who listened to her stories about her day as if they were the most important thing in the world. 2 years into their marriage, Julia took on a leadership position in the financial department, something she achieved entirely through her own merit. She didn't want special favors, and Pedro respected that completely. They had a rule at work. They were colleagues first, partners second. Life wasn't a fairy tale. They argued, disagreed, and sometimes hurt each other with words said in the heat of the moment. But unlike before, there were no more lies. Every conflict was resolved with honesty, every challenge faced together. When their first child was born, a little girl named Clara, Pedro cried uncontrollably in the hospital room. Julia laughed through her tears. The big CEO, crying like a baby. "She's the most important project of my life," he replied, holding his daughter in his arms. Family life made their bond even stronger. Julia's parents became doting grandparents, and Pedro's grandmother, though older, lived to see the continuation of the family she had raised with so much love and effort. Years passed, and Pedro and Julia became an example not just of love, but of resilience, humility, and partnership. Within the company, they were admired not only as leaders, but as people who never let wealth or status change who they truly were. At a company anniversary celebration, Julia gave a short speech that summed up their journey. "Life surprised me in the most unexpected way. I thought I had fallen in love with an intern, but in reality, I had found a partner, a man who challenged me and made me grow. The truth hurt at first, but it also taught us that love built on honesty and respect can survive anything. And today, I can say with certainty I didn't marry a CEO, I married the love of my life." The applause was thunderous, but Pedro's eyes were fixed only on Julia. For him, every word she said was worth more than any business award or contract. And so, their story wasn't about the poor girl and the rich man, as gossipers might have said. It was about two people who found each other, made mistakes, forgave, and chose day after day to walk side by side. Not a perfect fairy tale, but a real, enduring love story.